Let's start cycle 2 with Michigan's segregated past and present. The words are startling to modernize. Negro area, old, obsolete. Obsolete means out of date. Shifting or infiltration. Infiltration means entrance into a place, especially to cause damage. Jewish and Negro. Mixed poorer class, mostly laborers. These are U.S. government descriptions of neighborhoods in Michigan from the 1930s. At this time, the government created maps of communities to determine their quality. The language they used makes it clear they believed mixing races hurt home values and that all white neighborhoods needed protection from lesser populations. When most people want a new home or business, they likely need help from a bank. Banks can loan out money to help pay for expensive things, then charge money until they are paid back. Before they hand over the money, though, banks study the people they're lending to. They have the power to decide who gets a loan. But how they make that decision can prove to be remarkably unfair. One such way was with redlining. A red line through a community meant it was poorer. At this time, it also meant that this community had many Black or Hispanic people living there. People living in redline communities couldn't get a fair loan. Through redlining, the government made it near impossible for Blacks and others to get loans in better, mostly white neighborhoods across Michigan. Government-approved segregation helped to shape areas of Grand Rapids and Flint. Black people were not allowed to buy real estate in certain areas, either because of explicit laws or because they weren't able to get loans from the bank to purchase homes in those areas. Blacks were largely blocked from loans not because of their incomes or credit scores, but because of their race. The division of neighborhoods into good and bad, white and Black, persists in many Michigan cities and regions. In almost every area with even a handful of Black families, the home ownership loan corps residential security maps were colored red, meaning Blacks could only get loans in segregated areas and could not freely move beyond those areas with the aid of government-backed mortgage, a benefit that was not denied to whites. So we're seeing that Michigan in the 1930s is incredibly segregated, and the government has control over that. It also means that a lot of people are very prejudiced in those areas. We're going to read pages 204 to 206 and see how that affects Herman E. Calloway and his band. Please open up your book to page 204. Chapter 18. We got in 2 cars to drive for an hour and a half north of Grand Rapids. We were headed to a dinky town called Mecosta. I got to ride with the band, while Mr. Jimmy and Hermione Calloway and the instruments were riding in the Packard. Miss Thomas stayed back at Grand Calloway Station. I'd been living with Miss Thomas and the band for about 7 days, and this was already my 3rd trip on the road. The band was doing their next favorite thing to playing music. They were teasing each other and talking about Herman E. Calloway behind his back. The thug said to Dirty Deed, "I'd be offended, man, and I ain't trying to say that you ain't good on the 88s. 88s is another word for piano, because pianos have 88 keys. But you know the reason you got this gig is 'cause you're Dutch. You're white, and you don't have the strongest personality in the world." Deed said, "Yeah, well, such is life. You think I'm gonna give up the best gig in the state 'cause you be offended? Take a look out the window, baby. There's a depression going on. How many folks you see living like us, Negro or white? Not many. That man may have his faults, but he's a struggler. I'm putting my hat in with him." Eddie looked at me and said, "Bud, Mr. C has always got a white fella in the band, for practical reasons. But we don't hold his skin color against him. He can't help that he was born that way." Scholars, I want you to be taking notes in this next section because this question is on this lesson and it's on the test. Deed said, "You're just too kind, Edward." Eddie kept talking. "We do that 'cause the boy can play. Mr. C won't compromise on his music." I said, "Why does he always keep one white guy in his band?" Deed said, "It's the way of the world, Sleepy. It's against the law for a Negro to own any property out where the log cabin is, so Mr. C put it in my name." So there's one reason. I want you to make a note of that. This is one of the reasons that he keeps a white man in the band. For the property. Eddie said, that, and a lot of times we get gigs playing polkas and waltzes, and lots of these white folks wouldn't hire us if they knew we were a Negro band. So Deed goes out and sets up everything. So there's our second reason, because Deed, the white man, is able to go set up gigs for them. But what do they say when the Dusky Devastators show up? Deed said, well, it's too late for them to say anything. It's us or no music. Eddie said, and Mr. C tells them if we aren't the best band they've ever had, then they don't have to pay us. We haven't been stiffed yet. Scholars, this is huge. This means that they even gave the people permission, even after they've been tricked, saying, hey, if we're not the best band, don't pay us. And they have been paid every single time. That tells you something about Herman E. Calloway and his band. I don't know what, like, they're amazing. Everyone loves them. Eddie said, and Mr. C with all the arguing and jokes about Mr. C, the trip seemed really short. We unloaded all of our instruments and waited for nighttime to come. I'd heard the band play and practice 1,000 times and still had to just about sit on my hands when they were finished so I wouldn't bust out clapping. We finished our set at a little place called the Laughing Jackass, and I got to sleep right on stage to guard the instruments. The next morning, I was packing everything into the cases when I got some real bad news. Hermione Calloway told Mr. Jimmy, I must stay and catch up with Eugene. You head back with the boys. The man who owned the club, Mr. Eugene Miller, used to be one of Mr. C's bands. Mr. Jimmy said, Bud, take your time loading everything into the Packard, and you can ride back with Herman. Ooh, let's see how that turns out in this next section. First, I need you to answer this question. So you should have been taking notes. Why does Herman E. Calloway need to keep a white fella in the band for practical reasons? If you can, try to give me a direct quote. And then when you're done, move on to cycle 3.